posting this because I need to get it out of my head and my wife is tired of hearing about it, which is fair. It's been 3 years and I still think about it more than a grown man should. Some background. There were three of us. Me, my older brother Franklin, and our mom, Sabrina. Dad was gone by the time I was 19. Heart thing. Quick. So it was the three of us. And then it was Franklin and me splitting the job of mom once she started slipping. Franklin's 4 years older. He was always the one people trusted with things. Loud, warm, remembered your kids' names, picked up the check. I was the quieter one, the one who did the actual paperwork and got no credit for it. And if I'm honest, that resentment was already sitting there in the foundation long before any of this. Here's the thing I've had to make peace with. Franklin didn't hate me. That would have been easier. Franklin needed to be the good son, the reliable one, the family cornerstone, because it was the one thing that was reliably his. He wasn't smart in the way that got rewarded, and he knew it. And so the currency he traded in was being the one everybody could count on. And I think I've had 3 years to think about it. I think when the money problems started, he could not survive being the person who'd caused them. He'd rather it be me. It wasn't even personal, is the awful part. I was just the version of the story he could live with. The money. Mom sold the house when she moved into Ridgeline, the assisted place off Route 9. And there was a chunk left after the deposit. Something like 40 grand. Meant to cover the gap between what her income covered and what the place actually cost. Franklin handled it because Franklin handled things, and I just had my second kid and I was drowning. And honestly, I was relieved not to have one more account to babysit. I signed off on him being the one on the account. I want that on the record because it's the thing I've replayed the most. I handed him the knife myself. About 8 months in, Ridgeline sent a letter about a missed payment, then another. I called Franklin and he was smooth about it. Some story about the transfer timing, the bank, he'd sort it. He always had a story and the stories were always plausible because Franklin was genuinely good at this, better than me, and that's not me being modest. Then Mom called me confused about why they were talking about moving her to a different room, a worse one, and that's when I actually looked. The money was mostly gone, not all at once, dribbled out over months, ATM stuff, transfers I couldn't follow. I didn't understand it yet. I just knew the account that was supposed to have 30-something thousand had a few hundred in it, and my mother was about to get moved to the bad wing. So I did the dumbest, most honest thing, which was call Franklin and ask him directly. No strategy, just, where is Mom's money? And this is the part I need people to understand, because everyone assumes I must have missed some warning sign. I didn't. Franklin didn't get defensive. He got sad. He got quiet and sad, and he told me he'd been worried about this, that he hadn't wanted to say anything, that he'd noticed I'd been under a lot of pressure with the new baby and the mortgage, and had I maybe borrowed against the account meaning to put it back. He didn't accuse me. That's the genius of it, if you want to call it genius. He worried about me, out loud, to me. And I actually sat there for a second wondering if I'd done something and forgotten. That's how good it was. By the time I got off that call, the story was already moving without me, because Franklin didn't confront me. He confided. In everyone. He called our Aunt Kimberly in tears about how he didn't know how to handle it. How he didn't want to believe I'd take from our own mother, but the account was in both our names and he just didn't know. He told our cousin Zane. He told Mom's old church friends who visited her. He built it as a man wrestling with a terrible suspicion about his little brother, and a man wrestling with something is 100 times more convincing than a man accusing someone, because nobody defends against sympathy. By the time it got to me, it wasn't an accusation I could fight. It was just a thing everyone already gently, sadly knew. I tried to fight it anyway, and I want to be honest that I fought it badly. I got loud. I got the bank records and waved them around at a family lunch, and the problem with bank records is they showed the account we both had access to. They didn't have his name stamped on the withdrawals in a way a confused aunt could read, and me shouting about routing numbers while Franklin sat there looking wounded and saying he just wished I'd get help. That did not play the way I thought it would. I looked exactly like what he'd described. A cornered guy with a spreadsheet, too angry, protesting too much. My wife Yasmin was the only one in that room on my side, and even she told me later, in the car, that I'd made it worse. And she was right. And I was so angry at her for being right that we didn't talk the rest of the night. That was 3 years ago. Here's where I am now, and here's why I'm posting instead of sleeping. Mom's care. I ended up covering myself, quietly, refinancing to do it, because whatever the family thought of me, I wasn't going to let her sit in the bad wing over this. Nobody knows that. Franklin certainly took no credit-adjacent hit for it, because as far as everyone's concerned, the money vanished into my gambling or my debt or whatever the current version is. Kimberly stopped inviting us to things. Zane unfollowed Yasmin on everything, which sounds petty. But when you watch your wife realize half the family thinks she married a thief, petty stops being the word. My kids have a grandmother's whole side of the family that treats their dad like a cautionary tale. And I did not move on. I want to be clear about that because I know the healthy answer is to let it go. And I have not let it go 1 inch. I have spent 3 years being extremely, quietly, boringly correct about everything. Every dollar of mom's care documented. Every transfer of my own clean and traceable. I became the most auditable man in the state of Ohio. Not because I'm noble, but because I decided that when this came apart, and I knew it would come apart, because Franklin's whole life was a story held up by his reputation, and I know exactly how much strain that structure was under. When it came apart, I was going to be the one person in the whole family whose books were open. Because here's what I knew that they didn't. The money didn't go to me, and I'm not stupid. I have a strong idea where it actually went. And it's not a mystery to me anymore. It hasn't been for a while. I didn't say anything. You don't say the thing before it's yours to say. You wait until saying it costs the other person everything and costs you nothing. And you make sure that by then you're the only clean person left standing. Which brings me to why I'm posting. Because 2 weeks ago, Franklin lost his job. And then some other things started happening on his end that I've been hearing about third hand. And for the first time in 3 years, the story has started moving in a direction I didn't have to push. The structure's finally under more weight than it can hold. And I have to decide what I do with the thing I've been sitting on. I'll post the rest when I've got it straight in my head. I don't fully know yet how far I'm willing to take this. And I don't entirely trust the version of me that's been waiting 3 years to find out. Update 1. Okay. A lot of you asked the same question in the comments, and I'm going to answer it up front because it's the right question. If I've known for a while where the money actually went, why have I sat on it for 3 years? A few of you were kind about it. A few of you basically said, I sound like I've been marinating in this and building a case against my own brother like a hobby, and yeah. Yasmin printed one of those comments out. She left it on the fridge. She thought it was funny. I did not think it was funny, which is probably its own answer. So let me actually walk through what I knew, because it wasn't a lightning bolt. It was 3 years of small things lining up until the shape was obvious. The money left the account in a pattern. I'm not an accountant, but I stared at those statements enough to dream in them. It wasn't one big theft. It was steady, small to medium, over about 7 months. And it had a rhythm to it. Heaviest right around the start of football season and then again in the spring. And I knew Franklin. I knew Franklin the way you only know a brother you grew up sharing a wall with. I knew that back when we were kids, he'd bet our cousin Zane on literally anything, coin flips, which raindrop hit the bottom of the window first. And I knew that in his 20s he'd had a stretch where he owed money around and Dad quietly covered it. And it was never spoken about again because in our family nothing was ever spoken about again. That was the whole family operating system. You did not name the thing. You absorbed it, and you smiled at Sunday lunch. So when the money bled out in that particular seasonal rhythm, I didn't need a private investigator. I needed to already know my brother, which I did. But knowing a thing in your gut and being able to say it out loud to a room full of relatives who've already decided you're the thief are two completely different things, and this is what nobody who says, just tell everyone the truth, understands. I had a shape. I didn't have a receipt. And in the story Franklin had built, me pointing at him and going, no, actually, he has a gambling thing was the single most predictable move the guilty brother could make. He'd basically inoculated everyone against it in advance. The thief always accuses back. Everybody knows that. He'd made the truth sound like my desperate counterpunch before I ever threw it. That's the part that kept me up. He didn't just take the money and take my reputation. He took the truth itself off the table. As a weapon, because he got to it first. That is a specific kind of thing to do to a person, and I have not gotten over it, and I'm not going to pretend to for the comments. Now, this spring, here's what actually happened. And I swear I did not engineer a single piece of it, which is almost the worst part because I'd spent 3 years imagining I'd have to. Franklin lost his job. Sales, business-to-business stuff, the kind of role that runs entirely on the guy being likable and reliable, which was Franklin's whole brand. I heard about it from Kimberly, of all people. Aunt Kimberly, who has spent 3 years treating me like something she stepped in, called Yasmin. Not me, Yasmin. Because even in a crisis, I'm still the family leper. And she's on the phone doing this whole worried aunt thing about how poor Franklin's been. Let go, and it's so unfair, and the family needs to rally. And Yasmin's just holding the phone away from her face looking at me like, are you hearing this? And I want to tell you, I felt vindicated. Some of me did. But mostly what I felt listening to Kimberly rally the troops for Franklin was this old, tired flare of the exact same thing from 3 years ago. The automatic, unquestioned assumption that Franklin is the one we protect. Nobody asked why a guy that good at his job got let go. Nobody in that family has ever once asked a hard question about Franklin because asking would mean naming the thing. and we don't name things. So of course I started asking around, not in a dramatic way. I called Zane. Me and Zane haven't really talked in 3 years, but Zane's the one cousin who was never fully sold on the whole thing. He unfollowed Yasmin, but he never actually said the words to my face, and there's a difference. And I called him, and I didn't lead with the money. I'm not an idiot. I led with, hey, I heard about Franklin. What's going on? Is he okay? Which is what a normal brother says. And which I also meant, because that's the confusing part I can't get past. I did also mean it. And Zane talked. And what came out over that call, and a couple more after it, was that Franklin didn't just lose a job. Franklin had been borrowing from Zane, from a guy they both know from way back. Not enormous amounts. A few hundred here, a grand there, always with a reason, always with a payback date that slid. Zane had been carrying maybe $4,000 of Franklin for over a year and had never said anything because, and Zane actually said this, because it's Franklin, you don't want to embarrass him, he's good for it, he's family. The exact same force field, the one that protected him with mom's money, was still up and running, still working. 3 years later, on the next person. And here's where I have to be honest about myself in a way I don't love, because the smart, patient, 3 years waiting version of me should have kept my mouth shut on that call. Let it build. And instead, I heard Zane say, he's good for it, he's family. And something in me that had been holding still for 3 years just went. And I told Zane. I told him about mom's money, the pattern in the statements, the football season timing, all of it. In a rush. Probably too fast, probably sounding exactly like the cornered guy with the spreadsheet I'd sworn I'd never sound like again. 3 years of discipline, and I blew it on a phone call because I couldn't stand to hear that force field hum one more time. And Zane got quiet. And then Zane said the thing that has been sitting in my chest ever since. He said, real slow, that about 2 years ago Franklin had told him, as a warning, as a heads up between cousins, that I had a problem with money and Zane should never lend to me. Franklin had specifically pre-poisoned me to the one guy who might have listened. 2 years ago, when I wasn't even in the conversation. He was still, quietly, in rooms I wasn't in, reinforcing the wall. That's not a man who did a bad thing once in a panic. That's a man doing maintenance on the lie for years, keeping it painted, keeping it standing, long after he could have just let it fade. That reframed the whole thing for me, and not in a way that cooled me down. Because I'd been telling myself the story that Franklin panicked, that it wasn't personal, that I was just the version he could live with, and I said all that in my last post and I believed it. But a panic doesn't last 2 years. A panic doesn't remember to warn the cousins. What he did to me wasn't a moment. It was a policy. So now Zane knows. And Zane, to his credit, did not immediately do anything because Zane is also a product of this family and his instinct is also to not name the thing. And I could hear him on the phone trying to unknow what I just told him. He kept saying he didn't want to be in the middle of it. Which fair. Nobody volunteers for this. Real people don't want to be the guy who blows up the family. And I need the commenters who keep saying, just get everyone in a room and expose him, to understand that the room does not want to be exposed. The room has spent 3 years comfortable. The room likes the version where I'm the bad one, because that version is finished, it's settled, it doesn't require anybody to feel bad about how they treated me. But here's the thing that changed the board, and it's the reason I'm posting tonight instead of just stewing. Franklin called me, himself. First time in over a year, he's dialed my number on purpose. And it was not an apology. I need to sit with that in the next post because the call itself is the whole thing. It's the first time in 3 years he and I have actually talked, really talked, and it did not go how you'd think, and it did not go how I'd rehearsed it going 10,000 times either, because he didn't call to say sorry. He called because he'd heard I'd been talking to Zane, and Franklin, even now, even losing everything. Franklin came at me like I was the one doing something wrong. I'll write it up when I can do it without my hands going stupid on the keyboard. But short version. The wall's still up. He's standing behind it with the paint bucket. And for the first time, I've got something he actually needs, and he knows it. And that call was him figuring out how much. More soon. And to the commenter who said, you're going to find out that being right doesn't feel like you think it will. I already kind of hate that you might be correct. Update 2. I have to tell you about the call, and then I have to tell you about what happened at Ridgeline, because they're the same story, really. They're both about the wall Franklin's built and what it costs to actually put your hand on it. So, the call. He opened it like nothing. That's the thing people who didn't grow up with him don't get. Franklin can call you after 3 years and start talking like you'd hung up 20 minutes ago. Warm, easy. Hey, how are the kids? And for about 90 seconds I let it happen. Because some animal part of me has missed my brother for 3 years, and that part doesn't care about being right. It just wanted him to call. And then he got to it. He'd heard I'd been stirring things up with Zane. He said it gently. He was worried about me. There it was again. The same move. The exact same move from 3 years ago. The worry that's really an accusation wearing a sweater. He was worried that I was, in his words, dragging up old stuff. And did I really want to do that to Mom? Did I really want to put the family through it again? Hadn't we all been through enough? And I want you to understand, I had rehearsed this 10,000 times. I had a version where I was calm and surgical and laid it all out and he had no answer. And instead what came out of me was just, Franklin, I know where the money went. Flat. No spreadsheet. And there was this pause and then he did the thing that told me everything, which is, he didn't ask what money. He didn't say, what are you talking about? A person who didn't take it would have said what money. He went straight to managing me. He said I'd always had a hard time with the fact that Mom trusted him with things, that I'd been jealous of that our whole lives. And wasn't this really about that? Wasn't this me finally getting to make him the bad guy after a lifetime of feeling like the second son? And here's the awful thing. That landed. Because it's not entirely false. I told you in the first post the resentment was in the foundation. He knows exactly where my sore spots are because we grew up in the same house pressing on each other's. So he wasn't lying. He was doing something worse. He was taking a true thing about me that I've always felt like the overlooked one and using it as a lid to hold down another true thing, the money. That's his whole genius. He never uses a lie when a real thing will do the work. And for a second on that phone, I was 19 again. The quiet one, the one nobody claps for. And I almost let him fold the whole theft up inside my old jealousy and put it away. But I didn't. And I'll tell you what stopped me. I asked him about Zane. I said, so 2 years ago you told Zane not to lend me money because I've got a problem. Explain that one. Explain when I wasn't even in the room. And there was nothing gentle left after that. He dropped the worried brother thing completely and just got cold and said, Zane's confused. Zane's got his own money issues. I shouldn't believe everything Zane says. And did I really want to blow up the whole family on the word of a cousin who owes people? Which, think about that. He's telling me Zane's untrustworthy because Zane owes people money. Franklin. Saying that about the guy he owes $4,000 to. He didn't even hear himself. That's how deep the reflex goes. We talked for almost an hour and it went in circles because that's what these conversations do. That's what they've always done. We've been having some version of this exact argument since we were kids. Only the stakes keep going up. He'd get warm, then cold, then wounded, then he'd try worried again. At one point, he actually said that if I loved Mom, I'd let it go. And I said if he loved Mom, he wouldn't have moved her to the bad wing to cover a spread. And he hung up. He hung up. First real thing he'd done the whole call. Now, here's where I have to bring Mom into this properly, because a bunch of you in the comments have been asking why I never just went to her. And the answer is complicated, and it's the heart of the whole thing. Mom's at Ridgeline and she's not fully gone, but she drifts. Some days she's sharp as anything, and some days she's back in 1994. And for 3 years, I made the decision not to put this on her, because what was I going to do, tell a confused woman her favorite son robbed her? To prove a point? I wasn't going to trade her peace for my vindication. That was one of the few clean things I did in all this. I paid her bills and I let her keep her good son. But 2 weeks ago, I went to visit. I go every week, always have. Even through all of it. Which not one person in that family knows because I go on weekday afternoons when nobody's there to see the leper doing the loyal thing. And Mom was sharp that day. Really sharp. And out of nowhere, she asked me why Franklin doesn't visit anymore. And I said, he's busy, Mom. You know Franklin. And she got this look, and she said, and I'm going to remember this the rest of my life. She said, he stopped coming when the money got tight, didn't he? And I said, what money? And she said the money from the house. She said she'd never quite understood what happened to it, but she knew the two of us had fought about it. And she knew Franklin stopped visiting right around then. And she'd always wondered. She knew. Not the details. But some part of her, even drifting, had done the same math I did. She'd just never said it, because, say it with me, we don't name things in this family. She'd been sitting on her own suspicion for 3 years the same way I'd been sitting on mine. Each of us protecting the other from a truth we both half had. And she looked at me and she asked me straight, did I take it? Did her quiet son take her money? And I could have lied to protect her. Or I could have finally said, it's not me, it's him. 3 years I waited for exactly this. The sharp day, the direct question, the one person whose belief actually mattered asking me to my face. This was the moment I'd built the whole clean paper trail life for. And I looked at my mother and I could not do it. I couldn't hand her Franklin. I said, no, Mom, I didn't take it. And that was all I gave her. I let her keep the son, even now. Even with the door wide open and everything I'd waited for sitting right there, I couldn't be the one to put that on her. And she nodded like she'd expected that answer. And she took my hand, and she said she'd always known it wasn't me, and that she was sorry she never said so. 3 years. She'd always known, and she never said so, because saying so would have meant naming what Franklin did, and even she, even the person he robbed, would rather stay quiet than lose him. That's the family. That's the whole machine in one sentence. Everyone would rather I stay guilty than make Franklin real. So I left Ridgeline that afternoon with the one thing I'd wanted for 3 years. My mother's belief. And it didn't fix anything. It just clarified it. Because now I knew the truth wasn't going to come from Mom. She had it, and she was going to sit on it to keep her son. Same as always. If Franklin was ever going to be real to this family, it wasn't going to be because someone gently revealed it. The gentle route was closed. It had been closed the whole time. That's what 3 years of doing everything right had actually taught me. Being right, being clean, being the auditable one, none of it moves a family that has decided it doesn't want to know. And Franklin's world was coming apart on its own now anyway, faster than I could have pushed it. Zane, once I'd told him, couldn't unknow it. And Zane started asking for his $4,000 back. Not out of loyalty to me, just because once you know the guy borrowing from you is the same guy who cleaned out his own mother. He's good for it, he's family. Stops working. The force field only holds if nobody names the thing. And I'd named it to the one person still inside it with him. I'll finish this in the last part because what happened next is the part I actually need advice on. And it's the part where I stopped being able to tell whether I was doing the right thing or just finally, after 3 years, doing the thing I'd wanted to do all along. Franklin's wife, Lewis's, and the little one's mom. I haven't even told you about her yet, on purpose. Because she's the person all of this was always going to land on hardest. And she's the reason the title of this whole thing is what it is. Last part soon. I need to get the next one right. Final update. So, Kimberly, Franklin's wife. I called her Louise in the last part by mistake. That's actually one of the kids. I've been up too many nights writing this. Her name's Kimberly, same as my aunt, which caused endless confusion at every holiday we ever had. And the kids are Louie, who's 9, and the little one. I've barely mentioned her this whole time, and that was on purpose because everything I did or didn't do for 3 years when I really look at it came down to her. Here's what you need to understand about why I never blew this up. It wasn't only Mom. It was that Franklin's version landing on Franklin was one thing. He earned it. But it doesn't land on Franklin. It lands on Kimberly, who married a charming guy and had 2 kids with him, and had absolutely no idea the family's grocery money kept vanishing into a rhythm that matched football season. She's not in on it. She's the person the wall was hiding the truth from most of all. And for 3 years, the reason I sat on what I knew was not patience, and it was not some master plan. Whatever I told myself and told you in the first post, it was that I could not figure out how to make Franklin real to the family without detonating Kimberly and those kids right along with him. There was no clean shot. He'd built it so there was no clean shot. That's the thing I hadn't admitted even to myself until I sat down to write this whole thing out for strangers. So here's how it actually went. And it's not the confrontation I rehearsed. And I need advice because I genuinely don't know if I did right. Kimberly called me, herself. And unlike Franklin's call, hers was the opposite of smooth. She was rattled. She'd found out Franklin had been borrowing from Zane and from the other guy. Because Zane asking for his $4,000 back had finally cracked the surface. And she was calling me of all people because she'd run out of anyone else. Think about that. She'd spent 3 years believing I robbed my own mother, and she was still calling me. Because on some level, even the family's designated villain seemed safer than the truth she was circling. She asked me straight, did I know Franklin had money problems? And this was it. This was the actual moment, not the one I'd built the paper trail for, not Mom's bedside, this one. The wife, asking, with the door open. And I'll tell you what went through my head because you all deserve the honest version after 4 posts. Part of me, the 3 years angry part, the part that memorized every withdrawal, that part wanted to open every file I had and bury Franklin in front of the one person whose opinion actually holds his life together. I had it all. I could have made him real in about 4 minutes. And I sat there on the phone with it all loaded. And what I said was, Kimberly, you need to sit down with him and ask him where Mom's house money went. And don't let him talk about me. And don't let him get you feeling sorry for him because he's very good at both. And when he tries it, that's your answer. That's it. That's what I gave her. I didn't hand her the statements. I didn't play prosecutor. Because I realized, right there, phone against my ear, that if I dumped it all on her, Franklin gets to make it about me again. Me, the bitter brother. Finally getting his revenge, poisoning his wife. He'd survived that. He'd survived worse. He'd survived it for 3 years. The only version he could not survive was the one where the question came from inside his own house, from Kimberly. with me nowhere in it. So I got out of the way. For once in this entire thing, I understood that the most damage I could do to the wall was to not touch it, and let the person standing behind it with him finally look at it herself. She called him. I wasn't there. I'll never know exactly how it went, and I don't want to. What I know is what came after, which is that Franklin did the thing he always does. He got warm and then wounded, and then he tried the worried angle on her, worried about me, worried about the family, and she'd been warned that that was the tell. So instead of working, it was the confession. I'd handed her the decoder before he opened his mouth. He couldn't talk his way out because the exit he always used. Make it about jealous, bitter me. I wasn't standing in the room for him to point at. He reached for me, and I wasn't there. It came apart fast after that. Not because I pushed, because a marriage can absorb your brother is a thief, but it cannot absorb you moved your own mother to the bad wing and let everyone believe your brother did it and looked me in the eye every day for 3 years. That's not a money problem. That's a who are you problem. Kimberly took the kids to her sister's. Franklin's living in his car right now, or was last I heard. The job gone, the marriage gone, Zane and the other guy wanting their money, and no wall left because the wall was never really about me. It was about Kimberly not knowing. And now she knows. And the kids. The title of this whole thing. Lewis and the little one are at Kimberly's sister's, but the sister's got her own life and Kimberly's underwater and drowning. And I'm the uncle who, turns out, was the safe one the whole time. So they're at my place a lot now. Yasmin picks Lewis up from school with R2. He called me dad last week, not on purpose. Kids do that. They've got 4 adults in one syllable. It just fell out of him at the dinner table and he went red and I told him it was fine, buddy. And Yasmin squeezed my hand under the table. And I had to go stand in the garage for a minute because I did not know what to do with it. My brother's kid calling me dad at my table because my brother built a lie so big it finally fell on his own house. Here's the part I need you to sit with because I think it's the actual ending and it's not the clean one. Why did Franklin do it? Not the money, the maintenance, the 2 years of keeping it painted, warning Zane, the worry that's a weapon, all of it. I've had a lot of nights. And I think it's this. Franklin's entire worth to himself was being the reliable one, the good son, the guy you count on. Take that away and there's nothing under it. And he knew there was nothing under it and had known since we were kids. So when the money went, admitting it wasn't just admitting a theft. It was admitting the whole thing was hollow, that the good son was the empty one. He would genuinely rather I be a thief than be that. Not because he hated me, because I was solid enough to survive being the villain and he wasn't. He spent me because I was the only one strong enough to be spent. In some bent way, it was almost a compliment. I've decided I don't want it. So did I get my revenge? People keep framing it that way and I don't have a clean answer. I didn't do anything. That's the truth I keep turning over. 3 years I built a case, kept every receipt, made myself the auditable man, ready for the day I'd finally get to open the files and destroy him. And when the day came, I put the files down and told his wife to ask him a question and got out of the way. The thing that destroyed Franklin was Franklin, sitting behind a wall, doing maintenance on a lie until it got too heavy, in a family that would never name the thing until the thing named itself. All I did was, once, decline to give him the exit. And I don't feel the way I thought I'd feel. That commenter from part 2 was right, and I hate it. Being right doesn't feel like winning. It feels like standing in your garage at 9 at night because a 9-year-old called you dad. Franklin's in his car. Kimberly won't look at anyone. Mom still asks why Franklin doesn't visit, and I still say he's busy because I let her keep her son even now. Because it turns out I'm from this family too. And I also can't quite name the thing to her face. I don't know if I did right. I know I didn't do wrong. I know those aren't the same. That's where I am.